Hey guys, welcome back to tacNtrack. Today we're going to have a controversial conversation. Recently I was at dinner with a buddy of mine whose family has recently gone from anti-gun to feeling like they needed one in their household. And my buddy's wife asked me what appeared to be a really simple question. Are guns a good investment? Is this something that will hold on to its value and will increase in value? And the answer isn't as simple as a yes or no. The answer's yes, no, maybe, perhaps. So let's talk a little bit about it in some depth. So behind me here, I've got a wall of guns that I think are good, solid investments. And we'll talk a little bit about them and why they're good investments and what brings them to being a good investment. So, Mosin guns. I've got one sitting up there on the wall. You used to be able to buy a crate. One of the mini crates of Mosin guns for $75. They've increased almost $300 or $400. And they're a historic firearm that was brought into the country in extreme numbers and was readily available for some time. They're no longer being brought in, and they're not quite as readily available as they used to be. And they've really increased in value. Another good example that I think will be going up in value soon is SKSs. I've got one on the table here with me. These are rapidly increasing in value. I remember I bought my first one for, I want to say $100. I sold it a few years later for $400. So they are really good at increasing in value. We've got an M1 Garand here. We've got a K98, M1 carbine, and a 1903. These are all examples of historic firearms that have a provenance and a history to them, and they will continue to increase in value. And I don't think anybody really doubts that. So these guns are consistently going up in value, and they're well outpacing inflation. I think all of these will do that and do a very good example. And I think we've got some up-and-comers like this SKS, and I've also got right here behind me, this is a K98 Israeli. So this has been rebarreled in 308. I did a whole video on this. I've done a video on most of these guns. But these can be had right now for about $500. And they're a really, really good value. They're also a great shooter. But these will continue to go up in value. My AK up here, this is a Romanian AK, just a standard run-of-the-mill AK-47. I think I purchased it for $375. They're worth a good deal more than that today. So these are all examples of firearms that are going up in value every day without a doubt. So these are safe financial bets in guns, is these historic firearms, and they're consistently rising. So let's flip this board around and then let's take a look at some guns that are maybes. So as we're talking about the maybe category in are firearms a good investment, I think one of the best examples of that is this. This is an Innotek DC-9. Nobody would have thought that this would have been a gun that would be valuable today when it was produced. These were produced as cheap firearms, near throwaway at the time in which they were made. But they made an indelible impact on society, and these are seen as iconic and are highly sought after by collectors wanting to collect them, not because they're a good gun, but just because of the impact that they made on society. This is not particularly good impact, but nevertheless made an impact. So you never know with guns on what is going to be. But I've got behind me some examples of firearms that I think may very well be a good investment. The PS90. It is, once again, sort of kind of fills the category as this. It's iconic. It's one of those firearms that a lot of people think of when they think of that. Really, the early 2000s, inventions of the PDW. I think the PS90 will do well over time. This is a Winchester Model 50 engraved in hardwood. So shotguns like this may or may not do good over time. But I think the engraved versions of these classic shotguns will do very, very well over time, but they haven't been established as a proven firearm at this point in time to increase in value. Now, I've got a early 1900s LC Smith. It has done phenomenally well in increasing itself in value, and I think a lot of these guns from the 50s are on the verge of getting there right now. Down here we've got a Carcano, and we've got a Type 38 Arasaka right here. These are both World War II firearms that today are not very valuable. But I think they're just a little bit behind the curve of some of the other firearms that we see from World War II who have increased dramatically. You can actually grab one of these Carcanos right now for about $300, and you can get these Arasakas for about $400, and I think we're on the verge of seeing those greatly increase in value. We've got a Saiga 12 right here. This is a Russian-built Saiga 12 shotgun. I think we'll see some of these guns coming out of Russia that are no longer going to be able to be imported increase in value pretty dramatically over the next little bit here. The Saigas, some of the Vepr products, I think will really, really do well. This Romanian PSL, I think will do well over time. This is kind of a classic, iconic military firearm that's still in production today. You can still buy these new. Over here on the far left, we've got a gun that you may not be familiar with. This is a Setme LC. The Setme LC is a shorter barrel collapsible stock version of a Spanish battle rifle that was used by Spain for quite a good while. You can also get Setme Cs, the 308 variants. Both of these guns, I think, will greatly increase in value. And the Setme LC is a good example of a firearm that I think will grow in value significantly simply because it's rare. You don't see very many of these. I doubt, most of you guys have ever even seen a Setme LC in person. You can buy them from Malcolm Art. We'll do a whole review on the Setme LC because it's got issues. But I think that is a good example of a firearm that will increase in value simply because they're rare in the United States and they're cool and unique. Down here we've got a PW87, which is a cheap, poor knockoff of an otherwise great gun, the Winchester 1887. And what we see sometimes with some of these knockoffs, clones, and reproduction firearms is that as the real firearm increases outside of the range of people being able to afford to buy them, that the value of their clones and knockoff goes up dramatically. And I think the PW87 is a good case example of a firearm that really has relatively no value today that will possibly be valuable in the future. And I think all of these are good examples of maybe. So we're going to change the board out again. I'm going to get back to the nose on the firearms that will not increase in value, I don't think. And then we'll talk about the NFA, because we're going to cover the NFA as a totally separate group, and we'll talk a little bit about the NFA. Alright, so finding firearms that are a bad investment is actually fairly hard to do. So had a little bit of trouble filling the wall behind me with examples of firearms that are probably a bad investment. But let's take a look at a few of these and why these might very well be bad investments. We've got a Winchester SXP up here. Why is the Winchester SXP a bad investment? Well, I don't really know that it'll decrease in value, but it's a fairly common, unremarkable firearm. They're kind of a dime a dozen. So firearms like that may not increase in value and may not go up over time. We've got a Ruger American over here, which, by the way, is a fine firearm. But hunting rifles, especially once you put a nice set of glass on them, do not do particularly well as far as resale value goes. Typically, you'll get a fair amount of money out of the firearm compared to what you paid, but where you really lose on is anything that you add to them in glass. Hunting rifles don't do particularly well on resale value. Hunting rifles with wood stocks typically do better than synthetics. Now me personally, I'd rather have the synthetic stock if I'm going to be exposing it to a lot of moisture. So, kind of some pros and cons there. That doesn't mean they're bad guns, just means they're not good investments. We've got a Mossberg 930 JM Pro over here. This is a competition-based shotgun. When you're looking at competition-based firearms, they typically don't do well over time. As soon as they're not the latest and the greatest, they're going to decrease in value pretty heavily. Up here we have a perfect case example of a firearm that you'll never come close to getting your money back out of. So this is my personal firearm here. It is the gun I shot most recently in a 2-gun competition. It's a left-handed, all custom built AR-15. When you start custom building a firearm, you're almost never going to get your money back. Especially when you start doing stuff like custom Cara coating and that kind of stuff, just isn't going to be something that you get your money back out of. We've got a custom built 1911 9mm. Once again, another competition style build. This will never be a firearm you can get your money out of. Nor is this Glock 34. Same kind of deal. Custom build, custom Cara coat, optics, all that good kind of stuff. This isn't going to be a good resale value. I got this guy out of the safe to talk to you guys about optics and resale. So it's got a night vision optics set up on it. And when we start looking at high-end optics and glass, they generally don't hold resale value, especially something like this that is all digital. These have shelf lives, they're not going to hold on to their value. This AR-10 itself may do okay in resale value. I don't think it's a good example, but especially once you put an optic like this on it, it's not going to hold up well. So we're not going to change the board around to talk about the NFA and NFA. Is NFA items a good hold of money, and are they going to increase in value? So suppressors. We've got an SDN6 here. Suppressors generally don't increase in value, right? You can still produce these, there's no problem there. Where we will see suppressors go up in value over time is if they start banning the new manufacturer of suppressors, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. So suppressors generally do okay on the suppressor itself, but you're going to lose all your money and all your mounts and all your setup like that you've done. That is money to make your rifle good, right? Another good example of bad resale in an NFA item is this. This is a short barrel shotgun. It's a TAC-14 that's been converted in Form 1. I'll never come close to being able to get my money out of this. Reason being is almost everybody would rather buy a new one off the shelf, convert it themselves, and Form 1 it, and not have to go through the transfer process of having to transfer this guy. So short barrel shotguns, short barrel rifles, suppressors generally do not do well as far as long-term value. Now what does do incredibly well is fully automatic transferable firearms. Stuff like Uzis and M16s and AR pattern rifles, those go up every single year consistently. They're one of the best investments you can have, and they're a consistent increase and have been since 1986. These are the best financial investment that you can make in the world of firearms. Downside, your initial buy-in is probably going to be more than $10,000, depending on what you want. I personally, if I'm looking at resale value and buy-in expense, I like the AR patterns and the Uzis. I think those are very good value points. But it's going to take a lot of money to buy into those, so that may not be for everyone. So, to answer the question, Are firearms a good investment? Yes, sort of, kind of, maybe, and no. But I would tell you, overall, you're going to do very well financially with firearms as an investment. And they're going to at least keep pace with inflation, with some few notable exceptions, and most of those are going to be custom-built jobs. I hope you guys found this informative. If you've got any questions, post them down there and below. Thank you so much for checking us out today on tacNtrack.